Sup Shredders, my name is Logan aka Spiderhands and welcome to an SP Reviews where today I'll be checking out a track from an act named Hazel McQuade titled Philadelphia Square. And if we switch over to here, I should note that apparently the songwriter for this was James Fairchild, so if I'm not mistaken, and feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, I think that Hazel's doing the vocals for this and I think that James Fairchild did the songwriting, but I could be wrong, and they could have also, yeah, that's my understanding. So we're going to listen to it from start till finish. We're going to listen to the track from start till finish, yeah, and we're going to hear what we think. Let's go. Apparently this is also a tribute to Elton John, which is cool. Apparently he's no longer touring, so obviously that's, yeah.
Long ago there was a record shop on the corner. Had a single door with a peace sign, some pictures of rock performers. There were bell-bottom girls with hoods atop, looking fine and tight around the black lights. Records in the stores with posters on the wall, and Alden singing Benny and the Jets from a glass top count.
I mean, there's nice references to Elton's discography here. I think the piano playing is articulate and flows really nicely, and the strings are a nice accompaniment too. They're very emotionally appropriate.
We were young and so was he, and now the future is here. It's like a thief who stole those days from me. Can you hear the bell in Philadelphia Square? Can you see the lights on Venus? And when the choir sings, just as I am, he softly says, Jesus, I did the best I can.
Yep, great job bringing the drums in here.
To all his songs, one after another. My AM radio had two knobs. He kept me happy when he came on. Riding Craig on magic bucket seats. My girl loved the piano sound when we cruised the city streets.
I mean, it's great to have the drums be so articulate with those 16th note grooves there. The organ is adding a nice whole tone warmth to it. The whole band's coming at this point. Classic composition technique with developed instrumental layers here, but it works incredibly well.
And he sings an unknown song, the final verse that says, I love you all so long. Can you hear the bell in Philadelphia Square? Can you see the lights on Venus? And when the choir sings, just as I am.
Phenomenal backing vocals. It's like a choir is behind it, you know what I mean?
So fast, Benny and the Jets so far back. And now I'm standing here with tears on a Saturday night and waving goodbye. Just doesn't seem right.
Oh, that phenomenal minor turn there. Oh, okay. Was that more of a key change?
We were young and so was he, and now the future is here. It's like a thief who stole those days from me. Can you hear the bell in Philadelphia Square? Can you see the lights on Venus?
Great choice of
And
refrain.
when the choir sings, just as I am. Elton, you go so fast, Benny and the Jets so far back. And now I'm standing here with tears on a Saturday night and waving goodbye. Just doesn't seem right.
And that was it. That was the song. I do think it was a fitting tribute to Elton. And welcome to the conclusion of my review of this track from, if I'm not mistaken, Hazel McQuade on the vocals. I've also got James Fairchild doing the composition. This track, Philadelphia Square. Now, what do I think this track is about? I think it's about someone who is coping with the loss of one of their musical heroes. Not the loss of them as if they passed away. What I mean is the loss of them being able to doing touring or anything like that. You know, it's the end of an era. The future is here. We really enjoyed the time we had with them, but now we're in a position where we just simply have to say goodbye. We have to wave to them. And I think there's a certain sweetness about that and that bittersweet nature. You know, we've got to appreciate the time that we spent with someone. We can't just take it for granted that they existed in the first place, but it's also okay to mourn the loss of someone in your life. You know, we're going to have their music still, but it's great to be able to actually go see them perform. And I suppose it's the understanding that it's the end of an era and that we're going to have to potentially have to move on with life as it is. It's just a reminder that nothing is permanent. I think that the concepts that we're talking about today with the story were reflected well in the vocal performance. I thought it was very warm and authentic, and it did kind of remind me of a little bit of how Elton John sung. The almost conversational tone with a lot of heart in it, a focus on the chest voice there, great intonation with those words. They came through nice and clearly. It's very articulate, easy to understand, not only the verse parts, but also the hook lines that are repeated bridges into those motifs. It's great. Great vocal technique. Great transitions between the head and the chest voice when it came in. I also want to give a shout out to the backing vocals there, were tremendous in the sides and those chorus parts. It sounded huge in those sections, and they covered the frequency spectrum and the stereo field really well. I think in addition to that, what we had going on with the track itself at 3:49 was fantastic. The length of it was just within that 2 to 4 minute sweet spot. I'm always an advocate for that. I don't think you should assume the average listener has like 5 to 7 minutes to hang there with your track and to gamble on it, especially if it's a first impression. So I think that it's great when we don't take that for granted. We present a track that's well put together and well delivered, and I think that the instrumental parts, you know, with the intro there on the keys, coming into those verses, bridge and choruses, with things gradually being introduced, like the drum kit later on after the strings and the piano, with the vocals being very resonant and clear, and the mix is fantastic. We had a story to guide us through, but the accompaniment did not stay the same. There was variation to it, and I really appreciated the effort put in there to make a performance that was actually very meaningful. All around, the things sounded really well connected in general. I mean, I think the piano line did remind me of a lot of Elton John's discography there. It was quite a technical performance there. We were very adept with our left and right hands there on the keys, but there were never any situations where it felt alien or as if we were trying to be too harsh with them. Even though we felt sad, we weren't ready to really commit to anything particularly nasty or egregious. I think we're still trying to keep the overall tone of it reasonably presentable without getting too deep in it. We had some sort of poppy elements in it that we didn't need to go into the more darker regions to get the message across. I suppose more because the point was that we were happy for them, even for Elton to even exist in the first place, despite the fact that we won't be able to see them tour anymore. The strings with their mid-range flow there, always a great way of adding a sense of warmth, and it's very dramatic when the strings come in. There's a sense of emotional tension there. When it resolves, it's fantastic, but when it highlights some of the minor triads in the harmony, you can feel a little bit lost and a bit sad, and I think that's the beauty of adding it in that intro section. We didn't have a lot else. There was room for that. When the bass, the drums came in, it was nice to fill in that low end and for things to float a little bit less. There was still a groove and great use of rhythm in those intro passages with the 16th notes on the keys, as well as the whole notes countering that with the strings. But the groove on the drum kit with the 8th and 16th focuses there was elegant with a quarter note accent, and I think that any fills that we had transitioned well between the sections. And the bass did a great job of filling out that low end and equalizing the frequency spectrum and the overall harmony itself, grounding it. The guitars, when they came in, including the solo section later on, were exquisite. I really appreciated what they were adding there on the sides of the stereo field. It wasn't to try and overwhelm the listener with more of the same. We had lots of muted parts and little picked parts going between the left and right parts of the stereo field, but it was also the case where when we needed to do some strums or some bigger parts, we brought it into the center, and it basically had a break from the main sort of vocalist and brought everything in nicely. I thought it was really sweet. We did a great job of accentuating an alternative lead layer, and I think that was really important to do so, because even if it's within a 2 to 4 minute sweet spot, we cannot take the listener's attention for granted. It's nice to have changes in that focus from time to time. And I thought that after the lead part, coming down a little bit for like an interlude or a middle eight was fantastic. I mean, coming into that interlude after the second chorus where the solo was about to be was a great indication that things were about to change. But we came back to a kind of middle eight-ish kind of refrain of the hook line there, obviously afterwards, which was nice and sweet, and it rounded things gently after that twist in the tail there after the, with the interlude. And then finally we had that outro chorus there where everything came in, and it was really sweet. It wasn't too overwhelming. You could have potentially have gotten bigger with that outro chorus, but I think we wanted to keep a lot of the elements we already had in there without making it too much for the audience to potentially take in at the same time. And the song finished nice and succinctly. So I don't think there was a note out of place for the instrumental performances there. They segged nicely and each had a specific function that they fulfilled to a more than acceptable degree. And the motif on top of it not only paid homage to the person that we're making the song as a tribute to, but I think in additional to that, we had a feel of it where we were grateful for what we had with those major harmonies there. We never strayed too far into the minor tone of it. The song never felt really sad, you know what I mean? The use of majors were charming, bright elements there, and a mid to high range focus was gorgeous. I think it just sounded like someone really cared what they were singing about, and it came through really authentically without a note out of place. I mean, finally, studio recording, mixing, and mastering was golden. I think that the vocals were nice and present in the mix. The rest of the instruments found their place within the frequency spectrum in the stereo field. It had an old-timey kind of feel to it where it makes me wonder whether it was recorded on an analog console, because it had... you can kind of, this sounds like hocus pocus, but I've heard tracks recorded on the big old school discs, and there's a tone associated with it where there's just, it almost feels nostalgic. Either they have recorded it on an analog disc or they've done some effects processing on the chain to make it sound like that. Maybe it's the use of purely analog instruments within it that gives it that sort of tone, but I think with that in mind, and as well as the EQing and filtering being really well handled, and a lack of things weren't suffocated by additions to the effects chains, let's put it that way. It was just great vocal performances on top of the instruments being in time and played well. And I suppose the things were leveled well. There was dynamic range within the track. Things weren't the same loudness all the time, which I appreciate. It's always good to have range and perceived loudness, because the listeners are more likely to pay attention if there is that adjustment there. If everything is the same loudness, people will just hear the same thing and they'll become bored. It's the same reason you need to have different chord progressions and bass lines within a track. And, James Fairchild knows that. They're an accomplished songwriter and they ought to be proud of themselves for this track, as well as Hazel McQuade for their work on it, I assume, with the vocals. And finally, we have ourselves, it's nice and loud without pumping, so limiting compression is handled well. I mean, effectively, this is my review of this track from Hazel McQuade and James Fairchild, titled Philadelphia Square, and hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, please do go show us some love via the various social medias and YouTube page, and stay cool and stay safe, and please remember to support your local musicians and artists at this point in time, as they help more than ever thought of crazy stuff going on in the world, and I'll catch you in the next review. Spiderhands out.